So hi, I'm Jesse, I'm Ableton Product Specialist, and I'm going to do a push demo and workshop here at BPM. Push is really the extension of the session view, but the difference is like rather than just sort of controlling your clips, let's say you create some clips in a session view and you just sort of trigger them off, it actually allows you to create the clips from the beginning in your ideas. So you can actually sketch out your entire sort of rough structure of a song and then sort of work on it later. So what I want to do is just show you basically how it works and sort of steps that you need to take to sort of get a basic sort of structure of your tracks laid down. So the first thing to notice is that you've got these lit 64 pads that are velocity sensitive and they're also pressure sensitive. So it means you can actually work with this so-called aftertouch. You can actually press into the pads to control a parameter, let's say like a volume or a cutoff from a filter. And then next to that, you've got this touch strip, which really allows you to sort of pitch bend notes like similar to what you have on a MIDI keyboard. And right now, I don't know if any of you are using 9.2 beta at all, or the 9.2 yet? Okay, you can actually now use this also as a mod strip, so you can actually sort of control more parameters as well using that. And then above the screen, above the display, you've got 9 rotary encoders that you'll have to believe are there, because when I look at the screen, you actually can't see them so well, but they're there. There are 9 sort of all across the top, and they're also touch sensitive. So when I touch the last one, which is the volume, you can see I get a visual feedback of what the volume is. And then there are 2 here on the side. So one where my finger is for tempo, which I can make a little bit slower. And the other one, which is for swing. And then on the left-hand side where my finger is running down, and also on the right-hand side, there are a whole multitude of buttons. And I'm just going to explain how all these buttons work as we sort of create just something simple from scratch. You also see that my laptop is sort of tilted down, because the nice thing is that I don't have to actually focus on the computer screen while I'm sort of coming up with my basic ideas. So what I'm going to do is what the screen says. It says there are no devices, so I press browse to add a device. And as soon as I do that, I can enter the browser. So the same as the browser that you see in Live 9, except I'm seeing from here. And I can use the encoders here at the top, or I can use the buttons below to scroll through my different presets and load something up. So I'm going to go for a straight, simple 808 kit. And I press the green button to load it. And as soon as I load it, you'll notice that the 64 pads have changed their configuration. Yeah. So what I have are 3 distinct sections. The yellow section, which has all my sounds, which I can also navigate using the touch strip below. So like if I had more than 16 sounds, I could actually go to the different banks using the touch strip as well. And the other 2 sections I have are a step sequencer here at the top. So does everyone know what a step sequencer is? Yeah. Of course, okay, great. And the last section here is a loop length section, which just gives me a sort of sense of navigation so that I know where I am in the loop. So in order to start something off, I can just simply select the sound, like the kick drum, and I can just tap into the step sequencer. Turn that down a little bit. And okay, I've started off with my 4 to the floor, but I want to sort of expand on that, so I want to add more elements. I don't want just to have a 4 to the floor, so I'm going to choose my claps, for example, and I can sort of drop them in, and as soon as I do that, it's also recorded, but I don't want to put all these ideas into one section. So what I'm going to do is, there's a button here on the left, which is called duplicate. And when I hit the duplicate button, it just copies everything that I've just currently put into this idea, so that I can now continue and add, sort of flesh it out and add more bits and pieces. So the first thing, I'm going to take some hi-hats. Let's put them in here. Now I've got the hi-hats running, and I'm going to hit duplicate again because I want to increase that and maybe add a few more, like that. And now I want to add sort of a little bit of a dynamic to the volume, so I want to play with the velocity. So I'm going to select the first 4 pads, and I'm just going to trim the velocity down and let's say here, and make these a bit louder. So that's a way I can sort of work in the step sequencer and create different sort of velocities. And I'm going to hit duplicate again and still add some more stuff in there. And each time hitting the duplicate button, every time I want to add something else in. The other thing I can do is I can also take this, press down the pads and actually nudge the sounds. So I can sort of move them a bit away from the groove, from the grid. And maybe give them a different, make these a little bit louder. So keep going on and just add a few more sounds. So now I've got down sort of a basic idea pretty quickly, and the next thing I want to do is just to play some notes. So here I've got a shaker, and if I want to record this, I can record it two ways, simply just by sort of playing the notes. The first is if I switch on the repeat button, which is here on the right where my finger was. And what I can do here is now I can sort of play a note repeat. And using these grid buttons here on the side, I can actually change the speed, so I can go up to a 16th. It's okay, it's also difficult to see, but exactly where my finger is here is where the 16th is, and I can go to 30 seconds like that. And I can sort of play that with the velocity, sort of create more of a shaker feel. And if I go over here to the swing, I can actually sort of dial in the swing if I want to add some more swing to what I'm doing. So I'm going to record that. So I recorded those shakers, and of course the other way to record notes is simply just to hit record and record. Now you can see that I've haven't recorded that so tightly as I'd like to record it, so what I want to do is just to quantize that. So here where my finger is the quantize button, and if I hold the quantize button, I can actually set the amount of quantize I want to have for that particular quantization setting. So I don't want to have it quantized at 100%, I want to maybe just over 60%. And I can also decide how much swing I want to add into the quantization as well. So now, if I quantize something, it's going to be quantized to this particular value. The other thing that I can also do is I can decide whether I want to have the record quantize on, which will mean that every time I record something, let's say, and I'm playing notes or finger drumming, it's actually going to automatically quantize those notes as soon as they're played to this value. So now I've done that, I can actually decide, okay, I can either quantize the entire drum loop, or if I hold it down and just tap the pad, then I'm just going to quantize that pad. So that's the quantize done. So the next thing I want to do is just to add a simple sort of some changes to the sound, so just like a little sort of pre-production to what I'm doing, and just change up the sounds. So the device button here on the right where my finger is, when that's lit, that means that the most important parameters are mapped to the 8 encoders that are directly above the screen. So in this case, I can like pitch the rides down, and let's say in this case maybe add a little bit of sort of change the envelope, and maybe add a little bit of compression, maybe get rid of some low frequencies, and then I can turn down the volume. So now I can sort of mix everything in. So like with the shakers, I'll do the same thing. And let's do that same with the claps. And what else have we got? Oh yeah, of course, the last thing, the bass drum. So I'm going to pitch the bass drum a bit. So there I've got out of sort of the standard kit. I can still sort of adjust the stuff to sort of tailor the thing that I want to create. So the next thing I want to do is just to work a little bit on the drum pattern itself, but this time you can see I've got these 32 steps. And if you look now in this section, in the loop length section, you can see here when it's green, I'm in the first 16 steps, and when it's green here, I'm in the following 16 steps. But I want to increase that size so that I can add some more variations. So what I'm going to do is press this button on the left where my finger is, which is called the double button. And you'll see that when I hit the double button in this section, the loop length section just literally doubles its size. So it just copies that to over here. So now I've got a bar that's got 64 steps. Sorry, a loop that's got 64 steps. And what I can do here is, like in this case, I can actually select a section simply by double tapping it. And like now I'm in the last 16 steps of my loop. So for example, I could add like a little break in here. And then go back into the full loop length section by pressing both pads simultaneously. And so now I could say go into each of the sections and maybe add some more. And then go into this section. Let's see what I want to go. And then last of all, and then go back into the full section. So you can sort of come up with lots of different sort of variations with hi-hats or with whatever you like. And it's a really nice thing because it allows you to do it in two different ways, because you can always reduce the loop length size simply by pressing the pad simultaneously. So you can always kind of swap between those two different sections of the loop if you like. If you were wanting to do this on in a live set or something like that, that you could work with that and then always sort of keep the variation sort of going in a manual way rather than say just triggering off clips. So last of all, if I want to sort of mute sounds, I've got here on the right where my fingers are, I've got a solo button so I can solo sounds, and of course a mute button. So I've done everything I want to do with the drums. So the next thing I want to do is I want to add a bass line. So I'm going to press the add track button and I'm going to create another track. So I'm back in the browser and I'm going to go to analog, I'm going to go to bass, and let's go for a bass line, and I'm going to press the green button again to load it. So now I've loaded it, I'm in another track. So I'm going to go out of the browse mode for a second and explain what's happening here. So what happens here is that what you can see is that here where my fingers are going to go over are the blue notes. And they are the root note, as you can hear, in C. And then all the other pads in white are all the other notes in the scale. So, and what's particular about this sort of method of note input is that you've got this in key mode. So what it means is that I'm actually playing in C major, and I can only play the C notes, the C notes, I can only play all the notes in the C scale. So if you imagine you're looking at a piano, I can only play the white keys on the keyboard. I can't access the black keys on the keyboard, so I can't play any wrong notes, so to speak. Which means that in some ways, if you're not into sort of music theory, or how many of you do music theory? Or a few of you? Or all of you? Okay. For those that don't, it's a fun way of sort of understanding how sort of to play notes and just to get an idea down. The other thing is, it's also cool, is that rather than just playing from left to right, you also have the possibility of playing in steps of 3 and going upwards. So I could play a scale also like this. So I can actually go just straight up the keyboard. And the other thing, the pads, and the other thing that I can also do, if I start playing, you'll also see how the pads light up in the same place, so I can actually continue in sort of different ways. So it's not like I have to play it in a linear fashion that like what you have with the piano keyboard, where you can only play from left to right and swap hands over, and if you want to sort of access higher octaves or lower octaves, you can actually do that all sort of with both hands. And the other thing is if you don't like playing everything in the scale of C major, then where I've just pressed this button, the scales button allows you to access different scales. So if I wanted to play in a different scale, I can choose that, and you see if you can sort of maybe see with some of the scales, you see how the root note will change its position depending on what scale I'm going to use. So I'm going to stay in the major scale, and if I want to change the key, I can use these buttons to change the key. So if I wanted to play an A, rather than shifting the root notes to A, it actually makes A the root note, so I can play that as opposed to in C. So, and if I don't want to use this in key mode, I can switch it off. And in this case, in C major, what happens is that the pads that are not lit represent the black keys on the keyboard, and the pads that are lit, the white, represent the white keys on the keyboard. So I can play simple chromatic scale. So I'm going to leave it in key, and I'm going to go out of the scales mode. And basically what I want to do is just to record a really simple bass line, and to do this, first thing I'm going to do is turn down my Q level. And what will happen now is if I hit the fixed length button, or if I hold it down actually rather than just pressing it briefly, I can actually set the length of a loop that I want to record. So in this case, it's just simply 2 bars. And so when this fixed length key is lit, what it means is that when I hit the record button, I'm going to automatically get a clip to record. But as you can see, I don't have to sort of record and start playing straight away. The 2 bars is there waiting for me to play something, so I can just record whenever I feel like it. So I'm going to give it a first go, see what I can record. So I recorded 1, and that's the 2 bars. Now if I quantize it again and I say, okay, nah, that's not what I really wanted to record, I wanted to try something else. What I can do is then, rather than deleting it, I'm going to press this button where my finger is on the left, which is the new button, which just allows me to start a new idea. So it basically gives me a new slot, a new section, just to say, okay, I'm going to record something again. This time try a different melody or something like that. So I hit record again. So I recorded that. So I say, okay, that's all right, I'm happy with that. I want to move on and play some keys. Turn that down a little bit. So the next thing I want to do is record some keys, so I'm going to add another track to do that. So I'm going to look for some chords to play. Let's see, go down to strings, and I'm going to press the green button to load that. So now I've created another track. And just to explain what's happening here really quickly. So what's happening here is that basically if I want to play a chord, all I have to think of is the chord as a shape, rather than thinking of particular positions on a keyboard. So here's my root note. Let's keep that here. And so if I play a simple triangle shape, I play a major chord. So I can now play this here, but I can also transpose this shape to sort of different positions on the pads. Or I can play different shapes, so I can play shapes like this. Or I can play a major chord also like this. Or I can play a diamond shape. So kind of get the idea. You can sort of experiment with the whole concept of playing chords and how you can play chords, or how you can sort of octave chords if you want to play different things with both hands or with one hand, or, you know. And the other thing is that if you are sort of coming more from this sort of classical musical background, let's say, and you're playing piano or something like that, you can actually connect your MIDI keyboard at the same time as you've connected push, and then you can sort of play your chords and sort of start to learn, because it's also a new way of thinking about how to play chords and on push, and sort of learn the chords that you play sort of by the shapes that you create when you play a particular chord. So I'm going to just record a simple bunch of chords, and then what I'm going to do is change the length this time. So the fixed length I'm going to set now to 4 bars, and let's see, just record something simple. going to try another one this time. So I recorded those and I said, okay, it's all right for now. So I'm gonna go back into my drums and see what I can do there. And I want to add some effects in this case. So what I'm gonna do is use the arrow keys, which are right at the bottom, sort of here on the bottom right. And I can sort of scroll back to my drum racks. And so what I want to do here with the drums is I want to add some effects. I'm gonna hit the add effect button. And now I can go through my different effects that are in Live. And so what I want to do is first of all start off and add the distortion. So I'm going to take erosion and I'm going to choose a preset and then load it. So as soon as I've done that, what happens is that I have that effect there. And I can adjust all the parameters using the encoders directly above. So now I've added that, I want to add another effect. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a compressor. And in this case I want to add a glue compressor, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the glue compressor as a default. So rather than choosing the presets, I'm going to choose this green button to load the default. And so now I've got a glue compressor, but all the parameters now I can adjust myself. So this is what I want to do. And just change the values. So now I've done that. The next thing I want to do is maybe add an effect that's in between those two effects. So what I'm going to do is actually hold down the shift button and press add effect. And now I can add an effect in between those two effects. So I want to choose a simple EQ effect and load that. When I go out to the browse mode, I actually have that effect in between those two. So now I can sort of adjust those. Now, I don't want to keep this effect on the whole time. So what I can do is, I can select the different devices using the top row, but I can use the bottom row to switch them off, on and off. So the other thing that I can also do is to create different effects is, let's say for example with the strings that I have, if I want to automate a particular parameter, let's say for example the cutoff filter or something like that, which is here. If I do it this way around. And what I have to do is here on the left, make sure that the automation button is lit. And when I hit the record button, I can actually record the movement of the filter. And when that's recorded, then it get this sort of little square next to that parameter, and you can see that those that parameter has been, the automation has been recorded by the value changes. The other thing that I can also do is use a third method of inputting notes. And to do this, I can press the add track button to add another track. And this time I just want to create a really simple sort of sequence, but instead of playing it, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use a melodic step sequencer, which works in the same way as a drum sequencer, but for notes. So now I've got notes here, and if I want to use the melodic step sequencer, all I have to do is toggle the note button, and then I go into a different mode for inputting notes, and I'm going to use the fixed length to set the length of the sequence I want to create. So what happens in this case is that at the bottom, rather than having my my root notes spread out in the grid, they're all along the bottom, and all the other notes in the scale are sort of directly above. So what happens in this case is that the sequence will run from left to right, and so each pad now represents a step. So now if I put in 2 values, I can actually just add the notes in that way. And then go here and then add some more. To sort of create a simple melodic step sequence. And the thing is then, what I can do with this is that I can actually take these values and scroll between the 2 pads, the 2 sort of sections of the pad, of the sequence, and actually hold down the pads and create an automation. So now I've pressed the automation button, can actually change the values of each of the notes. So I can change the parameters. So that's another way of sort of adding some variations with the step sequencer. And the same thing I can also do with the drums. So if I go back to the drums, and let's start something new, and just with the kicks. And let's say if I focus on the claps, make them a little bit longer and a bit louder. Let's double that. So what's going to happen here is that I can also automate the notes in the drums sequencer by pressing the automation button. Let's say, for example, I'm going to change the pitch. I can change all the values, so I can sort of create different variations there. And let's say I can do the same thing with the hi-hats. And maybe let's say I want to change the volume of these. So you can sort of come up with all these different, you can even go sort of a level deeper with your drum variations and sort of come up with all kinds of step automated sort of drums with tonality or with effects or whatever you like. So another thing I could also do is sort of open up the return tracks. Let's say every time a clap plays, if I go to the actual track button and hold these pads down, I can also do the same thing and open up. Let's open up the send. So now the send is opened every time. So this return send is open every time the claps play. So that's sort of all the different things that you can do with sort of getting your ideas down. So if you can imagine, you can sort of come up with all these different ideas using different tracks and stuff like that. And then at the end, you probably say, okay, now I've got all these ideas, maybe I want to sort them out and try and work out where they are, sort of what parts of the song I want to keep, what parts I don't want to keep. So we're going to go from the note mode where my finger is to the session mode if I press that. And now press the volume button here in the top right corner where my finger is. And so now, if I just stop this, each pad now represents, sorry, each column represents a track, and each pad now represents a clip. So if I stop that, I can start from the beginning again. And I can scroll down with the arrow keys. In the bottom and there I've got all my different all the different ideas that I recorded. So maybe I want to start with this one. And if I say I want to bring those 2 ideas together and I think, okay, that's actually where I want to start, then I press the duplicate button where my finger is, and that brings those 2 ideas together then directly underneath. So if I want to bring those ideas together, again, I just press the duplicate button. And let's say I want to, let's see, play these instead. And then press the duplicate button and I can bring those ideas together. So the idea is, you can see I can sort of really quickly just sort of start to rearrange or reorganize my ideas and sort of put them together in little packages, which you call the scenes. And as the scenes, then I can trigger with the grid pattern, with the grid buttons on the side. So where I was using them before for the changing the resolution of the repeat button, I can use them here to play the different scenes and trigger them off sort of rhythmically. And the other thing I could do is also say, okay, I've got a whole load of sounds here at the top that I don't really want to start from there. So if I hold down the delete button and press the grid buttons, I can actually delete them sort of scene by scene and sort of actually sort of rearrange my ideas on the fly and sort of just get down to sort of the core sort of scenes that I think, okay, I'm gonna make the basis for my song. So if I switch now to the main view in Live, you can see here is like, now I've got sort of all the tracks that I was working with, and I could sort of now go in a bit deeper and maybe add some more audio loops or something like that, so to add to the idea that I have, or I could go and sort of start working a bit more on the production side of things and maybe sort of really go in and zoom in on different details that I want to do. Or if I want to, and I say, okay, I've got the ideas and they're all sort of laid out here on push, so you can see what is happening in the session view is exactly replicated here on push. I could say, all right, maybe I want to start recording this idea, so I'm going to press Shift and press the Record to Arrangement button, and I could start recording that to my arrangement. So that sort of gives you like a basic overview of how you can work with push.